Our scripture today comes from the Gospel according to John. We're going to look at John chapter 20, verses 24 through 31. Now Thomas, one of the 12, known as the twin, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them this time. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed, but blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." Jesus performed many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Thomas is known as the twin. Did anyone happen to see any news this week pertaining to a set of twins? A rather famous interview that went a little viral this week. Two women my age, around maybe a little bit older, twins, identical, clearly, gave an interview together for the news, and they spoke in unison. Like robots, repeating each thing. Somehow, every word they said was in unison, together. They told the story, their voices in sync throughout. Sometimes one a little ahead of the other, sometimes the other leading, but every word the same. Well, they've been on the news before. It's a fascinating thing to watch. If you search for it, I am certain that you will find it. Twins are rather interesting. I had aunts who were identical twins, and to this day, when we look at their pictures, none of us who are left in the family can tell which is which before the age of about 6 or 7. We often call Thomas Doubting Thomas. But I think that Thomas the twin is a better title for him. The gospel author here helpfully explains that Thomas wasn't present the last time the resurrected Jesus showed up to the disciples. Jesus, risen from the grave, showed up among his friends, but for some reason, Thomas does not trust their story. How many days did Thomas miss? How long was he absent? Was it just for that one day when they gathered together, or did he miss more of the story? Maybe he fled the garden when they came with Judas to arrest Jesus. And maybe he just got back into town. This is before the internet, of course. He couldn't just go on Facebook and get the latest update. Maybe he's only hearing everything in rumors that happened between when he left and when he got back. Why doesn't he trust the others? Who would play that sort of practical joke? Hey, remember our friend who died? He's back to life. Is this a trap? Remember Judas trapped Jesus? They were all friends a week ago. One of my favorite Ukrainian poets, Pavlo Tychina, writes of the disciples greeting Mary, the mother of Jesus, with the good news, shouting out to her, "He is risen," and her response is a question. He is risen? Indeed? It's all very hard to believe. Imagine you missed the last few days, the resurrection. Maybe you even missed the crucifixion, the sham trial, the denial, the dinner, the grand triumphal entry, the temple where he threw over the tables. You know, very often we pastors and church folks, we see the crowds on Easter Sunday and we think, oh, we wish they were here every Sunday. Very often we tell the joyful, triumphant entry on Palm Sunday, and then we go right to the resurrection on Sunday. And if you don't go on Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday, you don't hear the story. You go from one celebration to another, and you think that everything is happy and sunshine. But my goodness, there's a grave and death in between. He is risen. He is risen? Indeed? Imagine you missed a few days and heard the whole story of Jesus in one breathless, run-on sentence. How do you believe in the resurrection if you haven't heard how the people shouted, "Crucify him"? It doesn't take missing a lot to fall behind. For me, it was math class. I don't know about you. That when my family would take a vacation, we would have so much fun, and then I would get back and I missed the day we did fractions. And then we did something much harder if you didn't know how to do fractions. I always seemed to miss the math class where we revealed the secret of how math worked. And I never caught back up. Maybe Thomas missed the trip to the temple that day. When Jesus saw the money changers cheating God's people, and he got so mad he held a whip and threw their tables over and chased them out. How much would Thomas need to miss for none of it to make any sense? We too often play this game where we pretend the disciples were really rather dumb. Oh, there goes Peter. Oh, he's putting his foot in his mouth. Oh, goofy James and John can't decide who's best. Silly Thomas keeps on doubting. But we have had the benefit of sitting with these stories for 2,000 years, written by different authors from different angles so that we can see different viewpoints. We've had 2,000 years to think on them, to hear these parables and to question them. But the disciples were living it in real time. They had more questions than answers, but they followed anyways, giving up careers to follow a wandering preacher until the occupying government executed him. At the church I worship at, we have a retired professor who taught a Bible study on the early church, and he argued that those who followed Jesus along the lakeside in Galilee and those city folk who lived in Jerusalem and saw those final days, that they told very different stories about who Jesus was. About the Jesus that they knew. All right, here's your church history lesson today. So I studied a United Methodist missionary bishop named William Taylor. And William Taylor traveled all over the world, served on every continent inhabited by humans. And he had rather particular ideas about how we should fund mission and ministry. And his idea was that everywhere you go, you could start some kind of enterprise and make some money. And the missionaries who come could kind of run that enterprise. And they could fund all of their expenses through the enterprise that they have, rather than churches in America sending money to support missionary salaries. And so he tries this idea first in Australia. He tries to import eucalyptus trees to California, where he had served as a missionary pastor before. Forest fires today in California run out of control because of the eucalyptus trees. They burn at an incredible temperature and they explode, sending huge embers everywhere. We can thank the missionary Bishop William Taylor for that. Next, he called up his young friend, James Thoburn, who was serving as the overseer of India at the time. And he said to James Thoburn, who was 15 years younger than him, you know, India is a huge, massive country with wildly different peoples. Why don't you focus on the south where you've done ministry and speak several of the languages? And I'll take the north where I'll do my own thing and try my theories. And so he started a book industry. They had translated the Bible from multiple languages of the Indian country, and they had also translated other books. And so they started a huge publishing house that funded this work. Bishop William Taylor, the missionary, went on to other places in Latin America. His idea was to start schools staffed by Americans for expatriates, and through that allow those teachers to also be missionaries. It was a great model that was extremely successful, and the Pentecostal movement in Latin America came out of his churches, because he was very, very, very grumpy with the Methodist Church and especially with the mission board in New York City. They were always quarreling about finances and funding. They had one idea how it should be done, and he had another. He was elected bishop over Africa. And here's where his ideas went terribly, terribly wrong. He saw that rubber plantations could be successful. And so he had his missionaries start rubber plantations, and he reinvented slavery. It was just slavery with a few extra steps. It was a terrible, terrible thing. And the more that the mission board called him out and said, this is wrong and immoral, your ideas are flawed, what you're doing is wrong, the more he pushed back and said, oh, that cantankerous mission board. And it was your James Thoburn, your Bishop Thoburn, whose sister, who did ministry quite different than William Taylor, who invited his sister when he realized that many women were dying in childbirth because Indian culture and custom forbid men from touching women. And the missionaries were only training males how to be doctors. And so Bishop Thoburn invited his sister and said, come and start a medical school for women that they can deliver babies. And because of their efforts, Indian families were able to save many, many more of their children because women were empowered to serve as doctors. Bishop Thoburn was wise, and he was so deeply respected, and he had a deep friendship with William Taylor. And when William Taylor was making his case that the denomination was wrong and he was right and his way was the right way, it came to Bishop Thoburn to step up and to say, this man who is doing these things and saying these things is not the man that I knew and loved. Something is wrong. And in fact, he was right. William Taylor was going through the early stages of dementia. He was not of sound mind. He was making bad decisions because of his mental state. And it was Bishop Thoburn's wisdom and his courage to say, no, this is not right. Do we recognize Jesus because we've been with him and we've done ministry with him and we've sat with him in churches in the pews for 50 years? And do we know Jesus because we've walked with him on the streets of Meadville? Do we know Jesus because we've sat with him in the bunkers in Ukraine? Or do we only know the Jesus that we have interacted with? Have we only seen him from a distance, only seen glimpses of him? Have we only seen the Jesus who dresses up for church on Sunday and votes the way that we do? Have we met the Jesus who kisses lepers clean and sits with the folks that we don't like? Are we spending enough time sitting at the feet of the man who forgave those who killed him? Or are we too busy licking the boots of men who say we must be more powerful? Are we spending too much time crying in cemeteries for what we've lost? Or are we running out of here to tell the good news to others? Are we spending our lives sitting in graves, grieving the cruelty of the world and the death of our dreams? Or are we following the risen Christ who looks at the tomb where his body laid and simply asks, "What grave?" Graves are for the dead, and Jesus is alive. What grave can hold back God's love? What grave could bury joy, hope, peace, and love? What grave? 3 years ago, the war in Ukraine amped up. My friends in Lviv, the westernmost city, began to have missiles fall on their cities. Women and children fled. Men were forced to stay, to fight if need be. The little United Methodist Church that I had worked with, maybe 20, 25 folks, saw all of their families flee. Their children's ministry gone to bordering countries and beyond. The pastor sat with 5 or 6 lay people, all who were left. The men who weren't permitted to leave, the women who chose to stay, those without children and families who could take the risk. And they looked at each other and they said, "What do we do with the seats empty, with our city under attack?" And during the next bombing, as they went out to the city streets to go to their underground bunker, they saw people who had nowhere to go, and they said, "Come with us." And they found men and women, children who had come from the east, whose homes were destroyed, whose documents were lost, whose pets were gone, who had lost everything, who needed a place to stay. They had just an apartment smaller than this sanctuary, much smaller than this sanctuary. This is a big sanctuary. They invited 30 internally displaced Ukrainians to stay with them in the early days of the war, keeping more than 10 folks living within their apartment for more than a year. This is the story of each of the United Methodist churches, even the one in Kharkiv, just 25 miles from the Russian border. Although most all of their congregation fled, still some from Donbass, from the places lost under occupation to Russia temporarily. They fled to Kharkiv, not wanting to be far from their homes for when they can return. Each of our United Methodist congregations in Ukraine faced the same dilemma, looking around at their people gone and wondering, what does God have for us now? What grave are we in? What grave can keep new life from spreading, from sprouting, from joyfully rising from the dead? That United Methodist Church in Lviv, in the westernmost city, they now have a dedicated group of young people who came from the eastern parts of Ukraine, who have lost much but who have found a new community, have joined a faith group together. And some of them have connections back home. And one of the ministries that our United Methodist Church in Lviv participates in is they do camping ministries. They bring folks from cities like Kharkiv, teenagers and young people who go to school underground in metro, subway stations, to go camping in the mountains for a few days where the bombs do not fall, where there is silence and rest. What grave can hold justice from arriving? Jesus has defeated death. We declare with joy and confidence, not a question, He is risen, but a bold and prophetic statement, a joyful, hope-filled, joyful reminder that we need each and every day. He is risen. He is risen indeed. He is risen. He is risen indeed. Amen.